Well, so this stuff is easy for me because I'm 44. The other question I say to my fans again and again, whether they are smart or stupid, some people are stupid. I try to help people who are stupid. I don't just insult them or hurt them or something. But some people are stupid. The other question is, who do you want to be 5 years from now? I want everyone to be haunted by that. I want everyone to have nightmares thinking about the person they're going to be 5 years from now.
Out of nowhere, this guy stands up, he takes the empty bottle of Bacardi, hits the kid on the head with it, and screams at him, "Get the fuck back." I was so shook because it just instantly shattered the vibe.
Oh! You like that, old man? You want a piece of me? I don't want a piece of you. I want the whole thing. Oh!
So he's screaming at the kid, saying "I'm a boss, get the fuck back, I'm a CEO," and then he picks up a chair and tries to throw it at him. That's when everybody sprung into action. There were other guys in the group that were holding him back, grabbing the chair before he threw it. And honestly, that man, I think he's almost 50 years old and he chose to act like a fucking child.
So, Aysel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would like to introduce you as a researcher, author, and editor with a significant experience in Asia and the social sciences. And as regards languages in particular, you're interested in the politics, language, and history of Southeast Asia, particularly Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Yunnan. And concerning minority and endangered languages, you also have an interest in Southeast Asia and also Canada's indigenous languages, particularly Cree. And finally, some educational materials.
I think the one word that's missing from this is entertainer, or perhaps even comedian. That's a good description of the respectable side of my life. The other reality is, unlike people who got trapped in the academic path, like yourself, no offense, I really do have the freedom to talk very openly about politics and to joke about it. And a lot of what I do is entertainment, including, if you look at my YouTube videos talking about language learning, not just the polyglot phenomenon, but also how to actually learn a language. I am very much enjoying the lack of academic censorship and structure in my life. There's a lot of joking around. There's entertainment value there. So all what you said is true, but I am also a clown. And to what extent I'm primarily a clown rather than those other things is, yeah.
Okay, I think we'll certainly link a lot of materials from you in the description, but one of them will be your
researcher / clown.
So people can judge the percentage. Okay, so we'll link the YouTube videos there. Yeah. So let's talk about this then. My first question is about the polyglot community / industry, right?
Right.
I'm sure you know a lot of polyglots, some of whom are famous, specializing in Southeast Asia, right? Like Lin devotees or Tim Keeley or Xiao Ma, etc. What brought you to Southeast Asia as an area of interest coming from?
Oh, wow. Canada? Great question. The fundamental answer is that I felt there was no new research to be done in ancient Greek. I thought there was no new research to be done in ancient Latin. So then I started looking for a combination of research and humanitarian work, research dealing with the ancient world, and then also research on modern politics that can make a difference in the modern world, in the world as it actually exists. And it seemed to me that places like Cambodia really offered the combination of all these things. And I knew many professors face-to-face who had made the terrible compromises necessary to get a PhD and get on the teaching track. And they'd never taken any risks. They'd never gone out and lived. They'd never been where the red hot bullets fly. They'd never seen landmines going off. They'd never seen the reality of poverty, neither in Cambodia nor India nor anywhere in Asia. And they were very much limited to a chalkboard view of the world. Now, this does partly have to do with language, partly just in terms of pure language. You learn the language in a different way, actually being on a farm with a rice farmer, it's different. But in terms of philosophy, politics, history, and as I say, humanitarian work, actually doing charity work that helps people, that combination of things led me to have a kind of Cambodia-centered view of the world. And then for many years that followed, again, it wasn't just Cambodia, but Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Myanmar. And to give an example, India was a much lower priority for me, but I did do research on India, ancient and modern, including the languages. And China was a much lower priority for me. And later it became many years later, became my top priority. So yeah, that's the answer to that question. You know, again, you may have to ask yourself this at some point. How can I make a difference in the world? Again, what I liked about your channel is you do ask that question. A lot of channels don't.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
it's not just about the enjoyment of life. I could go to Hawaii if all I want to do is enjoy, like, you know, Hawaii, endangered languages in Hawaii. There's a different path to get on.
Right.
I knew one linguist in that field, actually. But anyway, you know, if you want to make a difference in the world, those are the kind of choices you have to make. But I think you'll relate to this immediately. When I decided on this kind of Cambodia-centered view of the world, the main alternative I was considering was actually Mongolia, was to do Mongolian as a language. And I think you can kind of see, just contrasting those two, many of the same issues, just war, communism, poverty, just the tremendous challenge of the language, and the way in which the language both involves modern politics, current opportunities for humanitarian work and to change the world, but also an ancient literature, a long written history. So Mongolia was actually my temptation. I have never once woken up in the morning and thought, I wish I had specialized in Mongolia. But however, I do often wake up and wish I had never gone to Cambodia. I'd never gotten involved with Cambodia, Thailand, and Laos, because it was a disaster. But now my YouTube viewers can benefit from my experience. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer. But
exactly. I mean, my next question was exactly about that, about what you said about making a difference through languages, right? As you know, it's a slogan of the hyperpolyglot activists: learn languages, make a difference. And it seems to me there are two false idols that you're targeting in your videos and blog posts, which are professors, as we already discussed, and also YouTube polyglots, right? And so I quote from one of your videos: this whole polyglot internet phenomenon is predicated on a kind of fraud, right? And you juxtapose that to the learn languages, make a difference, right? So on the one hand, you talk about polyglots. I won't name names, but you're welcome to, showing off and impressing teenagers and concocting get-rich-quick schemes. And on the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, you have people learning languages to make the world a better place, right?
Right.
But you also say in another video of yours that polyglots are not necessarily scammers. So
yes,
what do you
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. So people of all ages are involved in this. You know, Steve Kaufman, I believe, is more than 70 years old now, maybe 77. But there are teenagers. There are 16, 17, 18-year-old people involved in this. You know, it may be difficult for you to imagine what it's like to have just 10 women a month sending you an email trying to arrange to have sex with you. Now, I grew up very much before the internet. When I was a teenager, I had 10 women a month offering to have sex with me face to face. This is the reality of my life. But, you know, the extent to which fame becomes an end in itself, fame becomes intoxicating. Whether someone is 18 years old or 60 and 70 years old, you really can't overestimate that. Now, I've been involved in kind of many different walks of life, many different political and humanitarian interests, frankly. You know, you'll use one example: ecology. There was a time when nobody would have been involved in ecology to get laid, to have sex, for fame. What fame could come out of ecology as recently as 1985? You know, realistically, you're involved in maybe trying to help a swamp be a better habitat for frogs. You know, there's no fame in this. Well, now if you come on YouTube and talk about frogs and the swamp and the way in which almost any political cause interacts with social media, this is a very powerful influence for most people. Now, you know, so again, you've touched on something very important: the extent to which it's not a scam, the extent to which people are sincere, but nevertheless may be really intoxicated by the sort of opportunities that taking language education onto social media entails. So, I mean, language education, as recently as 1985, there was no glamour. in language education. There was no fame. I mean, let's say you were a white person teaching Chinese in 1985. Again, even 1995. Well, today, there's tremendous glamour and fame.
Yeah.
We've seen quite a number of sexually attractive white females and sexually attractive Chinese females, whether it's on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, and they are teaching you Chinese in the most salacious and erotic way imaginable. So again, this just didn't exist. There was an era, you may have seen this, maybe even with Ladino. You go to the archives, you go to a library, when language instruction was on an old-fashioned record, an audio recording, or even reel to, yeah. I've done that. Some of the languages, they're so obscure. I've sat down, you plug in and you listen to it. And if you're serious about language research, there was a time when this whole field had no fame at all, no sex at all. It was very much a commitment to labor and obscurity. I remember the biography of, I don't want to get his name wrong. It's a long Hungarian name, something like Chisoma Dekoros or something. But I remember a Hungarian man who walked from Hungary to Tibet in order to learn Tibetan. Of course, the life of Alexander David Neal, like what it was to learn a foreign language, let's say 100 years ago, and what the rewards were of eventually publishing on paper a fasciculi, or what have you, sorry, singular plural, a fasciculus, I suppose, publishing, some kind of written statement of what your research uncovered that maybe 100 people would read. So why am I saying all this? It's easy to ignore what a dramatic fundamental change this is for language education, for research, even for humanitarian work, even for a political cause like ecology. Why is it easy to ignore? Because you may be looking at other popular YouTubers, whether they do fashion, let's say, or comedy or sports, and then you start looking at language education videos. This is fairly continuous for us, and where language research videos, endangered language, all these things have the same flow. You are not looking at the category of language education, language research, etc., in that chronological way of saying, oh, well, how did this work 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or just so? Yeah, in that sense, we should find this transformation much more jarring than we do. But look, I have quite recently, I was in New York City, I was on Manhattan Island speaking Chinese. And I was not showing off. Well, I'm vegan, so a lot of what I'm asking is, does this contain milk? Does and in the supermarket, I had some questions about where things were. So that was the Lower East Side of Manhattan, exactly where Xiaoma recorded his videos. Nobody is impressed. Nobody is surprised. Nobody cares. I had this experience recently.
Right.
I forget how many months ago. This is just a few months ago. I was in New York. So yeah, there's more than one kind of jiggery pokery going on. There's real money involved and real fame. And I just want to emphasize at the low end, what if it's just 10 people a month who regard you as famous and want to have sex with you? Like, it doesn't have to be 1 million people. It doesn't have to be 1,000 people. Both for the male ego and the female ego, I've known heterosexual women who do stand-up comedy. It's a small audience, maybe 30 people in the audience. They feel beautiful. They feel like they're the center of attention. A few men a month try to sleep with them or tell them how beautiful they are, tell them they want to take them on a date. This is part of human nature. And now it's part of language education as never before. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things you pointed out to, which I think is important, and Albert Bruthos also highlighted it when he wrote an article about the polyglot industry and YouTube polyglots, etc., is how much more decontextualized language learning has become, as opposed to into Tibet, right? You can learn it at home based on a few videos from YouTube.
Right.
Do you think that is also part of the transformation of the polyglot community into an industry?
Right.
And can you be part of both the industry and the community, or are they mutually exclusive in your opinion?
The problem is you asked 3 questions. The first one, I may not remember the other questions after I asked the first one. I think what nobody is really willing to do research into is the significance of stress in language learning. I don't mean stress on a syllable, stress in a vowel. I mean stress in the sense of labor, work, suffering due to stress and anxiety, this use of stress in English. The main leitmotif in all digital language learning, whether it's an application on your phone, a YouTube video making money out of that, on YouTube or off YouTube, is the idea of stress-free and enjoyable learning. Now, probably the single most intense period of stress in my life was when I was preparing to go to Cambodia. I was preparing to go from England to Cambodia. I did not have a credit card. I had to literally carry cash. I kept cash in my boot, underneath my foot in my boot. And I knew from the day I got off the airplane in Cambodia, I was going to have to talk to a hotel owner. I was going to have to find an apartment to rent. I knew that the landlord could rip me off. Cambodia at that time was a dangerous country. It may be more dangerous now, not less. I was really aware of the threat of violence all around me. But you did in those days. You heard gunshots going off in the streets, and so on. You know, it was authentically a dangerous place. This is not paranoia on my part, but apart from that, being ripped off just verbally, you know, someone can take your money for rent, and they don't actually own the building. This kind of thing. The stress I was under, actually, in learning Cambodian in just a few weeks before I got on the airplane, I was absolutely cracking up. So now look, one of the schools of language education theory or language or educational philosophy is the performance-based school.
Yep.
Now, so again, you may know this stuff really well. I'm happy to hear what you have to say. But you know, the idea that actually putting on a costume and being in a situation, so we'll use the same example, like you pretend that you're the landlord and I'm trying to rent the apartment, and actually you're trying to rip me off, and we both wear costumes and we act the scene. But even when it's not acting, when just like the language teacher takes you to a shop, takes you to a real estate agent, and okay, look, now you have to speak, you have to perform, you have to speak the language under these stressful conditions. I do think there's a big question of the significance of stress. And again, Steve Kaufman is an example, but broadly, the whole polyglot phenomenon on YouTube, it's at the furthest extreme of being anti-stress and pro-relaxation. Now, I'll just put it the other way. This is one sentence. What is the advantage of learning a language in the native speaker's country, like learning Cambodian in Cambodia, other than stress? Putting yourself under that stress is dynamic. It is okay. Like, I've been interrogated by the police in several languages. I've been dragged into a police office by corrupt cops in Laos and interrogated. You're really making an effort to speak the language when your life is on the line, when you're being held at gunpoint. I've been held at gunpoint different times. Nobody's ever shot me. Nobody ever fired. That's stressful.
Yeah.
Not stressful.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Right. No,
but yeah.
I think this is kind of raising the question of the value of this approach to education, but also, to be fair, why is it that university language programs are so ineffective? Because definitely the flourishing of polyglot YouTube, and again, part of the sense in which it's not a scam, I think you would admit also, some university classes are so bad that you could learn more from a phone app. I would not deny that. We could start a real serious empirical study of examples where the class is so terrible that actually.
Yeah, I think you make a very important point when you say that the language industry is partly about this illusion of stress-free learning, right? And Slavoj Žižek talks about the cynical reason as being the prevailing reason of our time. And the fundamental idea is that you can have your cake and eat it.
Yes.
Right. And so it's saying you can learn a language minus all the stress that comes with actually learning a language, and fear as a motivator towards learning language, which you mentioned in some videos with this study of Cambodia. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think there's a lot of superficial talk about motivation and enjoyment as being fundamental to language learning, when there's no bigger motivation than fighting for your life, right?
Well, you know, I just asked what languages are you planning to work on? We come back to those questions in say the next 5 years. What languages do you plan to work on? Your plans could change.
Myself?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I'm currently working on Hacketia.
Right.
And by extension, I hope to keep on working on Arabic. And
I assume Yiddish too, which is from your videos, or no?
Yeah, I've been learning Yiddish this year, but I don't think it will be the focus. It will be more so Arabic and Hebrew and Hacketia.
Right. So I think you can imagine if you get the humblest job imaginable in Egypt, say teaching English as a second language, maybe humanitarian work or something, working at a refugee camp in Egypt, something like that. Within 5 years, you will be profoundly fluent in the language. Now, I don't mean everyone, I mean you. There are some, you'll meet them there. You'll meet guys who've been there for 5 years and learn nothing. That also exists, right? And it's a very interesting thing. I mean, if you're talking about measurable outcomes, what can I promise anyone, whether in my YouTube videos, or if I start selling an app, or if I have a website you can sign up to, what can we accomplish in 5 years? And again, all of this is in the shadow of universities that charge a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, for incredibly meager outcomes. What you will get if you get a bachelor's degree in Arabic, a bachelor's degree in Chinese, any of those languages that are really hard to learn. Yeah. So sorry, you want to come? You did actually ask me several questions in a bundle last time. I don't want to go back to that or go forward. It's up to you. Take it anyway. You want to take it?
No, yeah, I had a related question on something you mentioned. So when you mentioned veganism being trendy and having glamour, and then you compare it to language learning,
right?
Veganism acts as a metaphor for you in terms of the how glamorous it has become to learn languages, but it's also literally important to you concerning the book you wrote, which was literally about veganism, right? About food. To what extent can veganism help us learn about the shortcomings of language learning, or about the polyglot industry, or about the superficial nature of it? Do you think it's as much of a great question as veganism is to food ingest? You think due to polyglossia is as much of a trend to language learning as veganism is to food ingest?
So, okay, it's a really, really great question. I think that what they have in common is the question or the problem of measuring outcomes. Now, veganism is partly a political movement. And even the political movement is based on promising you an outcome. So it'll be things like they organize a political event in Washington, D.C. or in Ottawa. It will cost you thousands of dollars to buy an airplane ticket and rent a hotel room and attend this event. There are outcomes being promised even on just on the political side, but kind of more nakedly, more obviously, there are outcomes promised in terms of diet, weight loss, and health improvements. Now, I'm extremely cynical and skeptical about both. I'm extremely nihilistic about both. I see both. I wish I could tell you it was 99% fraud. It's very close to 100% fraud. What's offered on the diet, weight loss, fitness side, but also on the political side. And I think the tragedy is that it doesn't have to be. Now, so come back to language learning directly here. Has there ever been a better time in the history of the world for you to find other people who are serious about the study of the Ladino language and for you to work together? Like 100 years ago, 50, like there's this tremendous positive potential. So I've worked on a number of obscure languages. If I want to find just one person who is serious about Cree as a language, Ojibwe as a language, if I want to find any of these endangered languages, Pali as a language, but indeed, even with Chinese, it's remarkably hard to find someone who's serious about Chinese as a language. Who can you work with? How can you meet them? So there's this tremendous positive potential there, which I think is true of basically every political movement, charitable movement you can name or imagine. So it's true of ecology, it's true of veganism, it's also true of right-wing, say, fascist movements, left-wing communist movements. That positive potential is there. So there's an implicitly tragic juxtaposition. There's a tragedy in contrasting the reality of what's being done with this technology and what its effects are to the potential that's there. Yeah, that's my sincere answer. It's such a good question. It's possible that there was a better answer to that question.
And even taking that logic a further step, it is an unprecedented time to, once you have met online, to go meet offline.
Yes. Yes.
Which takes us to the issue of polyglot meetings, which is something I have examined critically with Dr. Usman and other people. Usman is the director of HYPEA, the International Association of Hyperpolyglots. By the way, you're invited to apply. Anyway,
no. Well, we'll see. If I speak Japanese well enough 6 months from now, then I'll.
But my question is, from this perspective that we've been discussing, have you ever attended a polyglot meeting in person? Would you consider doing so, whether it is the polyglot conference, the polyglot gathering, etc.? Esperanto.
It's a great question. My answer is brutally simple, and this is very closely parallel to veganism. I have never been invited to attend a single language-related event. I've never been invited to speak or give a paper for any of the languages I've studied. And again, some of them are quite obscure. Like, even if you think I'm not the world's greatest expert in Pali, and have you looked at my competition, whether it's Pali or Cree. So neither for any specific language nor for polyglot languages. I have never been invited to attend or speak at any vegan event. And within veganism, whether you want to say I'm famous or infamous or notorious, certainly more people are afraid of me than admire me, but I'm very much a known name. I've earned my position. I've earned my notoriety, we could say, over a period of 10 years. And within the polyglot community, several people have talked about this, including Santiglot, who appeared on your channel, including Oriental Pearl, who's a big name in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. Several people, when they first talked to me, said, "Oh, everybody knows you." Like, they've been to these polyglot events, and they've also just had a lot of Skype conversations with people. And they say, "Oh, look, everyone already knows your work." Which is, my videos don't get that many views, but the total number of people is not that great. You're talking about 500 people or something. So actually, again, my notoriety is significant there too. So look, long story short, this is an English idiom, but if you are not a cheerleader, I think you are excluded, and understandably so. I mean, like, understandably so. And the polyglot world. So, I mean, look, so you've seen these conference papers I assume you've seen them at least on YouTube, but I know you've been to some in person.
Yeah.
I've never seen someone get up on stage and deal with the hard facts about the extent to which these methods don't work. Any method. Here's Latin, here's Spanish. I don't own a single book by Assimil, but Assimil gets praised. Like, I have never seen a single presentation that was in that sense critical, talking about outcomes. Now, to be fair, I've also never spoken to any academic, like any formal professor, willing to talk about that or deal with it. And there are hard numbers, there are hard indications dealing with that. To my knowledge, only the US military will admit, will even admit there's a problem. Like, you teach Arabic is a great example. The US Army teaches people Arabic for 5 years and they can't speak Arabic. But I think that is really the question.
I see how that happens, because the U.S. Army has a direct incentive to measure outcomes and be fearful about not meeting them.
Right. Also, but all of us should. I mean, morally, we should be better than the U.S. military. We should be at least as good, but morally, we could be superior to the U.S. military. Go ahead.
The U.S. military has their own polyglot games, which is about solving tasks in real time, in the shortest amount possible of time, etc. And then similarly, I can also understand why nobody in a polyglot meeting of this sort will actually go on a stage and talk about the shortcomings of methods, because there's a lot of people involved and people's money involved. You will not be able to get away with that.
And let me just say, I'm open to talking about money. Like, I don't think it should be forbidden to get on stage at the same conference and talk about how to make money as a language educator. That's a legitimate.
No, there are some talks about entrepreneurship and all that.
But I'm saying implicitly, the money motive has made the most important topics impossible to talk about. That's the problem. Go on.
And there is this academic called Albert Broussos, whom I have discussed in my YouTube channel, who wrote an article explicitly about YouTube polyglots and how their methods, for the most part, it's not that they don't work, but it's that they don't add anything significant behind an exotic branding. Say, oh, this is my own method, but it's actually not your own method. It's just your own repackaging of previous methods, some of which have been discredited. So there's.
I just mentioned briefly too, but this is an example everyone can visualize. It's less abstract. I have an app on my phone that I think is excellent for European languages, like learning French. I think it's excellent, and I think it's terrible for Chinese. It's the same app. So that I'm not a troll. Like, I'm not out here saying, oh, all apps are. But I think you can imagine right away how that's possible. You have an app that works really well. Like, if your first language is English, like your first language is Spanish, maybe an app that works really well for you to learn Latin is not going to work for Chinese or Japanese. Like it, but just even this, there's this we apparently can't deal with. Now, again, neither in academia nor on YouTube. So the role of critique in education is so much more important than film criticism. Like critique in cinema, in film. Okay, the movie was good, it was bad. Let's talk about why the movie was bad. Well, people's lives are really ruined by the education system. People's lives are really impacted by language learning decisions. Really. So yeah, it's a great change.
Let's talk about that then. Language learning in formal education versus non-formal education, right?
Right.
You say in one of your blog posts, I quote, contemporary Western universities are not really based around the language teaching paradigm. They're based around a lecture and exam paradigm. And you discuss
this is possibly the most important sentence I've ever written in my life. So if there's one thing viewers of this channel learn, yes, the university system is not based around language acquisition. It is based around a lecture and exam format. That's right. Yeah.
And you also mentioned that there's a heavy reliance on textbooks. And I don't particularly agree with any of these two claims from my experience at New York University or Oxford University teaching languages. I think that maybe the bulk of your experience was prior to this, and maybe there's been a recent shift towards people being actually trained in the languages they teach, as opposed to being in a PhD in history and having to teach.
But look, I'd be fascinated to hear that. Like, I don't know if you want to talk about it. If you tell me that the methods used at Oxford University are different, it's not like I'm going to tell you you're lying to me. I'm very interested.
I mean, from my experience, while I was doing a PhD in Spanish, for instance, at the Spanish and Portuguese department at New York University, we did have a specific seminar to train us who already speak this as our first language on methods to teach that more effectively. And most of those methods were hands-on approaches. And we didn't have a textbook in the traditional sense. And what we thought we had to sing songs, we have to do all of these things that you mentioned in the blog post, which brings me to the point where I agree with you, which is ego investment in professorship that is fundamentally at odds with the hands-on activities that are required as part of language teaching.
Right.
And even
but let me just contrast to the methods you mentioned. So for those of you who haven't read the different articles being alluded to here, what he is saying is that the type of methods I'm saying professors should use, in his experience, professors actually do use. And I take it this is in New York and Oxford, which is good news. So it's not like he's contradicting.
New York, from my experience, New York University. I don't have as much experience at Oxford
so not, but he was at one
university. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, that I use it. But I will say, from my experience at many universities, I have never seen them used once, like not once, in any language across the board, neither modern nor ancient. And instead, what I see is exactly what I described in the article. It's just very brief, because I have to tell the audience what is we're talking about here. An entire Chinese language course that is just based around coming in, sitting in a chair, listening to an audio CD. The professor presses play and plays an audio CD, and filling out a multiple choice test on a photocopied piece of paper. That's the method of language education.
I had more of that approach when I was at high school, but as I said, at the Spanish department, at least Spanish and Portuguese department at New York University, we were consciously trained in teaching that way,
right?
And it's common to all instructors across sections. Now, this is not professorship; this is language lecturership, right? Which is very different.
Yes.
And where I agree with you is that there is a fundamental classist division between professors on the one hand and language lecturers on the other, which does not translate in the UK context because they do both. It's kind of mixed. But in the US, professors and language lecturers are two worlds apart, right? And so, as in the words of my supervisor for the PhD, language lecturers are not respected.
Yes. Yeah. Whether or not they're paid is another question, or how much money they make is another question.
And they do, like, from speaking from my experience speaking to colleagues who were teaching languages as language lecturers, they themselves have interjected that negative valuation, and they see themselves as being kindergarten instructors, rather than people who are worthy of respect, so that they no longer want to do that work. That work is hands-on, but it's not good because the ego investment is professorship. Yeah.
I have puppets in the background. You can see them over my head here. So you actually put your hand inside and manipulate the puppet. I have never once had a language teacher or professor at any level use a single puppet in a single class ever. I've never seen that. not for adults, not for, so just give you an example. So you mentioned,
I haven't seen that either in my experience.
okay,
Not the
well,
not the
this is a sign, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mentioned, so I have a friend who's in Switzerland doing Latin. Now, this book is really overrated, the Lingua Latina books, but I understand why people are desperate for and reach out for this style of Latin language education. Got to get a page here that doesn't have nudity on it. A lot of naked bodies in this book. But you know, the method being used, as he reported to me from Switzerland today, was it did not even include vocabulary memorization. They were told the structure of the language, the rules of grammar, and then it's all based on coming in, sitting down in your seat, and doing open book exercises and open book exams and tests. So you have a vocabulary list, you find the word in the dictionary, and then you conjugate it and write in the answer.
Right.
It's more like computer programming than it is like
which is also how
so thus people are desperate for this. Go on, yeah.
Which is also how language proficiency exams work at New York University.
Right.
So
they kind of did both.
You need to have pass a language proficiency exam in a language other than English or your language of specialization, in this case Spanish, right? So if I were to take, like I did, a French proficiency exam or a German one, they were exactly the same. It's open book, you have a dictionary, you have a text, you find the word, you translate it, and it's pass or fail. You don't even have to show, it doesn't matter if it's a 10 or a 5.5 out of 10.
Well, look, I just want to say this openly because you said it in a kind of coded way. You talked about basically the self-esteem of the language teacher, of feeling that what they're doing is kind of low or denigrating or it's like babysitting.
Yeah.
It's a huge issue. It really is.
Yeah.
You know, I do think it is denigrating. Like I do think in the same way that you have to kind of humiliate yourself to do certain kinds of jobs, I do think it wears people down. I do think it breaks them down. And the question of how much money they're paid and how they're rewarded and so on, that all fits into it. To have someone who really feels positively motivated to, in a caring way, work on the language for hours and hours, that's a challenge. It's going to be different in different cultural contexts. I said to my girlfriend the other day, I still get fan mail from my YouTube videos that are teaching Chinese. So this isn't theory, this is directly teaching the language. And those videos, they're political, just in the sense that they choose to use politically interesting vocabulary. So it talks about what is the difference between a protest and a riot, a political protest, and then the Chinese terms, and then this is how the newspaper described it, you know, this kind of thing. So it's implicitly political in this sense. I said, look, you know, when people ask me to make more videos like this, I feel like saying to them, you would have to pay me $1,000 per video. And then you stop and think about it. You think about how much work it is. And it's like, if we're being honest, maybe I have to be paid $2,000 per video. Now, again, a very small number of YouTubers are making more than $2,000 per video. I don't, you know, again, I don't know the exact numbers, but maybe Xiao Ma, maybe Lucas Lamparello, you know, you could try to look at how much money do they actually generate in total from a YouTube video. But again, I had a friend who was teaching languages in Los Angeles, California, at a university. And so as I recall, her total income was from teaching was about $1,000 per month to teach university level classes. This is a state of California. Yes.
You mean adjunctship?
So
like a
right,
course,
yes, right. So
technically
you're a teaching assistant or something, but she has a PhD. She's a PhD.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of people with PhDs doing adjunct roles. Yeah.
Right. So what she did, she actually showed me the numbers. I know this isn't a lie. So she was teaching at 2 universities simultaneously in Los Angeles and driving between them. And so she made about $1,000 from this university and $1,000 from this university. And when you added it up, her total earnings were $10 more than her rent. So she didn't get money from her mother or grandmother or something. Just the cost of rent in Los Angeles, $2,000.
Minus the fact that you don't get any benefits or health coverage or things like that, right? Because it's adjunctship. So the whole idea of adjunctship is that it's not included
in the States. I think the healthcare system is so broken. I think they got to give you health benefits because they know you'll die. You'll die otherwise. No Blue Cross healthcare. That I didn't ask about, but yeah. So I just said across the whole range, it is a factor. And I mean, look, you can make 100 YouTube videos with this. I think at some point you should make a YouTube video talking about charity and humanitarian work as such, and how it relates to either language learning or language education. Because I mean, I'm someone who feels I lost many, many years of my life doing charitable and humanitarian work. I did not learn Cambodian to make money. I did not learn Laotian to make money. I didn't do all this study and research to make money. None of it was meant to make money. But here I am at the end of that process. I'm now 44 years old. I have a lot of regrets. I have a lot of bitterness. You know, I'm really left feeling I made the wrong choices. Now, on the other hand, you know, there are people who just learned a language like Japanese to make money. I find that quite depressing about Japanese, is that all the other white people they're either just doing it for money or they're doing it for sex, frankly. But yeah, I just say that question of having either humanitarian or political instincts, and then what the real consequences are. And again, look, maybe the polyglot community is going to become a really wonderful, positive thing in the next 10 years. Like it's possible it can improve.
Right.
I don't think it can get worse.
So
I think even your own approach, you could be kind of driving it in a way that's
on that
connected
note,
to.
for anybody who's listening to this interview and is saying, okay, what you're saying makes sense, but what is the takeaway from this interview? Say we're talking to somebody who's 19 and is considering whether they will devote themselves to learning languages for the foreseeable future, and in what sense should they do that, or would they derive more meaning from doing? What would you advise to?
Yeah. So this is my 100% honest answer that I would give to someone who I do not think is stupid, that I do not think is an idiot. Some people are stupid. I often have to give advice to stupid people. But if I think someone is fundamentally intelligent, I would express to them the challenge as follows. You know, politically, this language you're going to focus on learning, is it a language you would want to read a newspaper article in? And is this a language you would want to write and publish a newspaper article in? And that starts to unpack for you what would justify the enormous sacrifice in learning the language. So I have published newspaper articles in Cambodian, in Thai, in Chinese, with enormous effort, no reward, I assure you. It's not as if I'm now famous as a result, but I've published a few newspaper articles in a few languages. You know, if your first language is Cambodian, if you grew up in Cambodia and the only language you can read and write is Cambodian, learning English, now you can read newspaper articles in English. That's tremendously powerful and liberating and important, right? Now, the problem is the other way around, right? So if your first language is English, what do you really gain by being able to read Cambodian? You know, maybe for you, it's worth it. Maybe for you to really understand what's going on in Cambodian politics, whether that's reading the newspaper or listening to the radio there, it's still a country where radio is important, to understand really what's happening in politics. Maybe, now can you publish newspaper articles? With Cambodia, you can be killed. This is real life. You are risking your life by writing about or talking about politics there. Now, exactly that same matrix, sort of, you think about it as political input and political output, rather than linguistic input and output, a different paradigm. Okay, should I learn Japanese? Should I learn Chinese? And then, as you know, with smaller languages, this is what you have to deal with too. Cree and Ojibwe. You know, so in Korean, there's almost nothing to read. You can read the Bible, translated. It's like Christian missionaries. There is some literature. I used to own every book that's been published, basically. Okay, slight exaggeration. Almost every book. But you know, I had them on a shelf. There were very few books published in Cree. There's very little to read. There's very little you can hear.
What do you do with them?
Right.
What did you do with them?
Right.
You got rid of them?
But yes, no, they literally went in a garbage dumpster. Yes, no, when I had to leave Saskatchewan, when that fell apart, all those books went in the garbage, quite literally. Yes, no, it's very sad. All the books I had for Laotian and related linked languages, I've studied some smaller languages too, like Tailu and ethnic minority languages, that all went in the garbage also. So no, I've put a lot of books, important books, in the garbage in my day with the heartbreaking process of giving up on languages. Okay, but just to return to the small language. But what difference can you make? What if what you're writing, what if your output matters, whether that's Cree or, I mean, you must be aware, like in Mexico, they have some indigenous languages that are still somewhat lively. What if that's the difference? And otherwise, I'm just being real with you. If there isn't a strong enough reason to lose 10 years of your life and part of your brain under one heading or the other, then don't do it. Now, you have some experience with Portuguese, right?
Learning Portuguese?
Yeah. No, you don't. Am I wrong?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I learned Portuguese from with a Brazilian accent with a bunch of Brazilians in Missouri. For a year.
In Missouri. So, there's an archive in Portugal that records historical facts about Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Myanmar from the earliest period of colonial contact. They have records, historical records about India that are more important than anything written down in India. And they're in old-fashioned Portuguese, a mix of Portuguese and Latin. How many people alive can do that reading? How many people alive will, right? Yeah. So again, it may sound bizarre, but for the right person, maybe even someone born in Cambodia with Cambodian as their first language, Portuguese could be the language to learn. It could be the most important language for you to learn. Mm-hmm. That's my answer.
Right. Yeah. So essentially, is the ability to make a difference to people's lives, to make a political impact, and to unlock knowledge that is coded in language.
Well, so this stuff is easy for me because I'm 44. The other question I say to my fans again and again, whether they are smart or stupid, some people are stupid. I try to help people who are stupid. I don't just insult them or hurt them or something. But some people are stupid. The other question is, who do you want to be 5 years from now? And, for real, for the right person, studying Latin could make you a better person 5 years from now. Not everyone. It's the right person, right? And, it's very, very hard for me to recommend anyone learn Chinese. It is just so much work with so little outcome. But for the right person, think about who you are today. Think about who you can be 5 years from now. Maybe Chinese, maybe that really is. And it's so different from, Spanish. Spanish is incredibly little work and an incredibly small sacrifice compared to Chinese or Japanese. But yeah, and I want everyone to be haunted by that. I want everyone to have nightmares thinking about the person they're going to be 5 years from now. It's both a positive motivation and a negative motivation. I learned enough of the Thai language. When I was in Thailand, I could still speak to a taxi driver. And I used to speak much more, whatever it is now, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I could speak language much better than I can now. I don't want to retire in Thailand. I don't want to be an old white man retired in Thailand who speaks the Thai language. That's not who I want to be. A lot of guys do. That's their greatest dream and fantasy. So it's hard. It's hard. These are hard decisions that ultimately do come down to, who am I going to be? And that's the one thing you can control. Ultimately, you can't control what difference you get to make in the world, but you get to decide who you are.
All right.
Do you find that inspiring or depressing?
No, I mean, it probably has to be both. It probably has to be both to work, right? So, Aysel, thanks a lot for sharing your views and your knowledge for the hyperpolyglot.
It's been wonderful talking to you. Imagine if we talk again just 1 year from now and everything's gotten better. Imagine if 1 year from now we're talking about the polyglot phenomenon on YouTube, polyglot language community. We're talking about, and everything's gotten better, and it's like, wow, it's possible. Things can change. So things have changed a lot in the last 5 years. They can change in the next 5 years, and they can change right now. Again, I give credit to your channel. I think your channel really can be part of that positive change.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'll continue to produce materials and videos which hopefully will go in that direction. Thank you, Aysel.
Thank you.